comparison is the thief of joy. Go on Instagram and you go look at people like yourself, people who are celebrities and doing these physical challenges. Regular Joes, I mean, unfortunate to say, some people are. They look at these people, they look at people on Instagram and they try to compare themselves to them and try to say, well, I want to be respected. I want to feel like that. I want to have that in my life. I want to have a challenge. But the reality is maybe that's not where you're at.
Hello, boys.
G'day, mate.
Hello, mate.
The tripod is back. It wasn't really a tripod though, was it? It was more like a... How many of us were there? There was 8. So it really wasn't 3 at all.
What's it, septipod? Is that 7? Let's make that up.
Mate, you're our wrong crowd here. And definitely don't turn to this guy. He's not going to know that. I lean to you for that sort of knowledge. How nice is it to get the boys back?
This is good. I'm enjoying this. Yeah.
Do you know what's crazy? Since the assessment, when I just I went to see Charlie just after LA Marathon just to get an assessment on some of the injuries I sustained, we were just saying how surreal it is, how quickly time goes. The fact that we would have done kind of like all our preparation leading up to Run for 1 Million, and I would have been multiple marathons into the challenge at this point. I can't believe we're already there.
It's like a year in itself, wasn't it? Like this weird kind of standout year last year where everything was a little bit strange and weird because you were doing this crazy challenge and everything just sort of evolved around it, didn't it, for a little while? This kind of strange time. We all travelled around the country coming to see you and calling you at all hours, checking in on you. It's just, it's this real kind of magical time. I think you'll look back on it.
I think Nick
feelings.
does. I think you look back at that quite fondly. I think you sort of, your life really improved when I came into it.
Oh, God.
Nick doesn't say it, I know it. So,
he knows, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But I'm really excited about today's episode. I think this is going to really benefit so many people that tune in for multiple different reasons. And I think actually what's going to be really nice about this is that people hopefully have more of an understanding that it's not always about, I guess, the background or the data of the individual, but I think the synergy is going to be so key to the success for you moving forwards. And I think that's what was great about our team, is actually, maybe it was luck, I don't know, but we just connected on a great level. Maybe that's all mainly because you guys were all under the same roof at the same time until, I don't know if that made a difference, but...
Well, none of us had worked together in the past. You know, we're all separate, doing separate things, separate businesses. And then we spoke about this recently, but it was just a great coming together of good professionals, and everyone understood each other. Everyone understood what everyone wanted from the whole project, and then it just worked out well. And I mean, we were saying we think you thought it went seamlessly and thought it went well. I don't know. Do you think so?
Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah.
That, you know, I've said this before, like that is the best I've ever been going into any challenge. And, you know, it wasn't easy pre either. Do you remember, like with the VMO, we had issues with the right knee. That was a bit of a speed bump. But the difference this time round was it didn't matter what speed bumps we were faced with. I think it was how quickly you guys were to communicate and execute the solution.
Yeah, well, there was this moment, and I remember it, where we all got together on this call. It was a few weeks into the plan, and it was... I think all of us hadn't really spent much time chatting together, and there was a bit of I think it was around the time your knee was bothering you, the VMO muscle was giving you some problems. We were looking at the training plan like, God, he's running a lot here, like maybe it's the running load. And there was this consensus that, right, he needs to run less. He actually needs to run less. We need to forget about optimizing him and just make sure that he doesn't turn up to the start line broken. So we got this consensus that, okay, we'll bring him down, build him back up again with the gym, and we'll drop his training loads, we'll treat on the side. Sharon was obviously there, huge help, soft tissue wise. And we all just agreed. We all just had this agreement, yep, that's the right way. And there wasn't really like a leader within the group. It was just all of us were all working towards the same goal, and it felt good to just have this equal voice.
Yeah,
it was great.
I think that's really interesting, isn't there? There wasn't a hierarchy, but at the same time, I think Chris being on the ground for the challenge was almost the go-to guy.
Yeah, once it started,
the message would be communicated to him, and then it was very much how he would wish to articulate that to me at that point in time.
That's right.
And it's interesting how each team member would communicate with me in very different ways, but the message would be heard. Like I remember with Chris, there was a really like poignant moment with the VMO when I think I'd run for like 10K through it and the pain was really bad. And in my head at that time, because I'd been through something similar like that on so many occasions, it was like, listen, you're going to face this through the challenge. If you can't run through it now, you're never going to be able to run through it. So I was pushing through, and the pain was just getting so much. And I remember calling up Chris being like, bud, knee's not great right now. And I remember him just being like, you fucking idiot, stop. What are you doing? Today's not your battle, like tomorrow and the next day are. Whatever you do tomorrow will impact tomorrow. So let's be smart about it. Because I think that's one of the questions a lot of people probably would ask you guys and myself is when to run through injuries and when not to. You know, like if you look at things like the Achilles heel, that was something that was brought up by a lot of people who have sustained that injury. That was something that we were very vocal about in the initial stages of the challenge, which I'd incurred. And actually by running through that, improved it, didn't it?
You essentially rehabbed it by running through. And the good thing in a way was that you weren't trying to run a time. So it didn't matter how fast you ran. In fact, you could walk for big chunks of it and that was totally fine. You just had to get to the end. So there wasn't this kind of urgency, and angry tendons don't like speed. So we could take that out of it and just say, well, what's going to be acceptable for this tendon? The tendon could probably just about handle some walking. It could probably just about handle some slow jogging. What we were looking for was like, does it get worse the next day? And we were really pleasantly surprised that actually you woke up the next day and it was okay. Like you'd had, what was it? It was something like a quarter of it, you could barely walk. Like you were just about walking. You woke up the next day and it wasn't that bad. Yeah. So that was the key really. Because if you woke up and you could barely walk again, all right, we're in trouble. We're dealing with a different thing. Yeah, well, there was this realization that you were always going to be the one that would choose when you couldn't run anymore. It wasn't our job to tell you that because it would be obvious to you. If it was going to be something below that threshold, you were probably going to run through it. And at the point where you couldn't run, you'd have stopped yourself. I don't think you'd have necessarily responded that well to us saying, you might have to stop with this. Because what does that do? Like it sets negative thoughts in your mind. But actually what we realised is that provided you were able to keep running, then it was therefore safe. And you knew going into it, you might damage, you might cause some injuries, you might have some problems. But ultimately, it was you were going to try and run through them anyway. So it was our job to try and reassure you when we thought it was just about okay. And I mean, we didn't tell you the entire truth a few times, did we? So there was a calf strain that was about halfway through that we essentially decided to say was a tight muscle. And you essentially rehabbed a calf strain by running a marathon every day, which was absolutely mad. But got away with it.
I think it made such a difference as well. You guys having the understanding of what injuries were sustained, but actually like what could be done to improve them. So certainly for me, that placebo effect of like, at the time we didn't know about this, the stress fracture or the torn calf, right? So for me, it was just I'm running through pain. But I think knowing you guys knew what it was, but equally treatment was being given, I just think that formula was amazing. Because had I known that I had the stress fracture or the torn calf, it would have made such a difference because every time your foot touches that ground, psychologically, you're just thinking to yourself, I'm making this worse.
Yeah. And look, the key from a physio perspective, if I'm going to be like clinically challenging about my decision, if you've got a torn muscles heal really well. Like the turnover of cells is quick, and it's quite rare that a torn muscle is going to end up being a lifelong problem. Same with a stress fracture of your bone. Like you might need a few months off, which is essentially what you needed in the end with some extra treatment. But they heal. You know, bones and muscles heal really well. If we were dealing with torn cartilage in your knee or your ankle or something, totally different. You know, that could be lifelong arthritis that we're potentially causing real problems with. So it's about making a judgment call. You know, is running through this one safe? Yeah, I made a call that it was. If you've got a big blown up knee that the swelling's not settling down from, different situation altogether.
Yeah, it's so funny how we're talking like this, and yet you literally ran yourself into an injury. Like Nick basically flies out. In fact, let me tell you how this went, guys. For those of you that don't know, Nick basically surprised me quite early on in Northern Ireland, and the whole point was that when I arrived at the start line, he'd be there, and you'd have a magical moment of hugging. Didn't you go to the toilet?
Nah.
You went around the corner.
I was waiting there for half an hour. You were the one that was late, standard. So, you know, I was holding it in.
I'm pretty sure you went to the toilet. Or, I mean, it was an alleyway. Who knows? And I just remember getting there, and I think I looked at Chris's face, and it was a bit like this. And I was thinking, why is he freaking out? What's going on here? You come round, and I was like, yes. And then I just remember chatting to you, being like, oh man, so you've kind of been training for this. And I think the furthest you'd run was 10K, that was 3 years ago, right? Or 3 years prior.
Yeah, or no, like as in the most recent long run I'd done was 10K.
Yeah.
That was also the longest I'd ever done. Yeah.
No training.
Nah, I was kind of like, my rationale was like, look, Josh is running a marathon every day. Like, surely I'd be able to jump in and do one. That was it. I was like, I'm fit enough. I'll be able to do it. Like, I'd play a lot of sport and train, and I was like, I'll be fine if you do it. Obviously, didn't go that way. So if that could be a lesson to everyone.
What was the moment for you where I think the realization hit in where you were like, oh, shit?
So the first half was all right. It was the second half when we were going out we stopped to having some food and whatever.
Yeah.
We stopped and I was outside the van and I was like, oh my God, my legs are fried. I couldn't even bend. I couldn't do anything. And I was like, I'm going to have to finish it. I'm going to have to finish this. I just kept saying, Josh is doing 76 of these. You have to finish one. Like, you have to finish one. So then I just went and did it with you. But that last bit where you dragged me through the end.
10K. I think it was about
disgusting.
10K, man. Like, you went through
disgusting.
some pain, but like you were shuffling.
Yeah.
Like, you were kind of dragging one foot. And I just, I've said this to you before, Charlie, like, it got to the point where we were trying to find anything to just stimulate him. Like, I had to put an iPhone to his ear to play any song to just get you out of the singing. Not great. But just those stories. I mean, listen, by the way, guys, we're definitely not promoting to do the same thing. But no. I tell you what, as far as stories and like memories go for me during that was one of my fondest because he was so broken. Oh my God. And you finished it though, which is just crazy. I mean, you did 2 with me.
Yeah, I did 2. So, I did 2.5, I guess. I did summer Bath. We came down to Bath, did a bit there. I did Chichester and then did London as well.
Yeah, God, London was just absolutely crazy. It was amazing. But I think a lot of people were asking me, how do you prepare for something like that? And I think what's really important when it comes certainly to the conditioning and I think the recovery side of things is that it's not like one shoe fits all. Yeah. When you look at your training, what you guys would do to prepare me for 76 marathons is going to be very different to prepare for a sub 3-hour marathon, for instance.
Yeah.
And so when people ask the question of like, what training should I be doing? It's quite broad, I think, in terms of like the response that you can give them. The one thing that I think I've realized, and I would love you guys to be able to share to those that are listening, is when it does come to the conditioning side and certainly the recovery, I just think there's still a lack of understanding and probably a lack of communication to those individuals of what it should be. Going online and just kind of plucking a plan that tells you is good for running is the same as just getting a running plan. That plan has not been made specifically for you. So if you're going into something in the beginning with maybe a prior injury, or are currently injured by something, or depending on what distance you're doing, or maybe what the terrain is going to be like, it kind of really does need to be tailored. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, let's use your case as an example. If we didn't test you at the very beginning, we'd found out we had significant differences right to left side hamstring and right to left side calf. And that was something from the very first session we had addressed and been like, this is what we need to work on. If we hadn't addressed that and found that issue, and you were just training through some generic program, you would still have that imbalance, or you may not have fixed that up and then got to the start line with that imbalance, with that weakness in that one side, and maybe you wouldn't have finished it. I don't know, but this is why people need to go and actually get tested, get assessed by a professional just to make sure that they are working on the right things and that they are building up their body in the right way, specific to whatever their goal is that they want to achieve. Use the example as well, like someone preparing for a sub 3-hour marathon or someone preparing for 76 in a row is very different, and it's very different from someone preparing for a 10K to what you did. So there's different intensities and programming that needs to be applied to whatever the goal is, but that's why you need to go and seek professional help to go and make sure that you're getting the right thing specific for you.
Do you know what? I think so many people have imposter syndrome, so they can't justify calling themselves a runner. But I think when you accept that is what you do, I think the question for both of you is like, when is it the right time for someone to be doing this testing? Because to a lot of these individuals, if we just sidetrack the financial side of things, for them to take it seriously, like a lot of people probably would look at like doing the testing and getting a physio and getting a strength and conditioning coach as like an elitist level approach to running. But actually, for someone that does park run every Saturday, would you say that's an unnecessary extra to have?
I think ultimately no one ever has to do anything, right? It's up to them. But if someone's interested in optimizing what they do, potentially saving themselves some time on training because they get to where they want to get to faster and they're more likely to do it without getting injured, then it might be worth the investment. But ultimately, it's always up to the person whether they choose to do that or not. There's even things you can do at home, like how many single leg sit to stands can you do in a row on one leg versus the other leg? How many calf raises can you do on one leg versus the other leg? You know, there's stuff you could do. Single leg bridges. So you've just got glutes, quads, hamstrings, and calves all done in the space of your lounge or your bedroom, right? So you can do a really basic level of fitness, of strength testing. Maybe even just like how far can you run? What was it, the Cooper 12-minute run? How far can you run in 12 minutes? And that gives you a rough predicted VO2 max. So there's ways of doing this stuff without needing all the equipment. But if you're then still struggling or you're getting injured despite doing some of that stuff, or you want to run faster again, you want a PB, you might then decide to invest a bit in it.
If you pick up a bad habit, right, very, very early on, and it's not rectified, in theory, it's only going to get worse. Mm-hmm. So, you know, for instance, say if one leg hypothetically is longer than the other, or you know, your foot plants in a certain way, you know, maybe you overextend. It might feel okay at that time, but if you're doing that over vast periods of time, that's how injuries will be sustained, right? So it's by having the assessment and the understanding to prevent that.
It's really interesting to use those two examples because one of them, in fact, both of them are really common. So leg length discrepancy is incredibly common, whether it's a true actual leg length or whether it's the pelvis that's just slightly shifted one way or the other. So it's incredibly common and normal. And a lot of people have it all their life. So actually trying to change it might be a bigger risk. So there's a bit of nuance here because you've got one leg longer than the other. You've had it all your life. You've been running on that leg like that all your life. Your body adapts to that difference in leg length. So sometimes it's actually fine and you start messing around with it, putting wedges in one side and change it. And the body goes, what the hell is this? I can't handle it. Yeah. And it starts to struggle because of the change. So it depends. If someone is obviously struggling and you can attribute the pain or the suffering they're having to that leg length discrepancy, you might experiment with changing it. But I really would use the term experiment because it might not work and it might actually make them worse again. So be prepared to take it back out again.
Yeah, I mean,
so it kind of depends.
Yeah, I tried insoles once, which was supposed to help, you know, taking the impact when you plant your foot. And actually, I think they ended up affecting me more.
It's normally more to do with your ability to handle load rather than the specific angles and gait and things like that. So you can try and look for the quick fix of insoles potentially. There's some efficacy, by the way, that they do work in certain cases, but not always. So if you try it and it's not working, it might actually just be that your body doesn't handle load well enough. So it needs to be a bit stronger in certain places.
I'd love to know what you two think on this. I think it's great that now more than ever, people are exploring different physical challenges, right? Mm-hmm. But the versatility of what it is they are doing, how sustainable that is, although mentally they, I'm sure, are loving what it is that they're doing, from both ends of the spectrum, you know, there's people I know who will do high rocks and then a week later they'll do a marathon and then 2 months later they're throwing themselves into a 50K or it could be 100K. And I just think to myself, how can you understand what recovery is needed when you are targeting multiple different parts of the body, but certainly from a physical point, like how do you even physically prepare for something like that? Because they completely contradict one another.
There's a lot of comparison is the thief of joy, right? That's what I think is the statement I want to use to explain this is when you go on Instagram and you go look at people like yourself, people who are celebrities and doing these physical challenges, regular Joes, I mean, unfortunate to say, some people are, they look at these people, they look at people on Instagram and they try to compare themselves to them and try to say, well, I want to be respected. I want to feel like that. I want to have that in my life. I want to have a challenge. But the reality is maybe that's not where you're at, you know? And this is why, again, maybe you need to have a strength conditioning coach and a physio to direct you and tell you, this is probably what you're capable of right now. Then you can look at doing something later, you know?
I think what's mostly more appropriate is that they're looking at themselves to compare. Like, compare your current self to your previous self. Are you any better? Compare your current self another 12 months down the line and then try and beat those times, for example, rather than comparing yourself to you. You know, what you did was remarkable, but incredible amount of physical, mental investment. And by the way, you've been an athlete for 20 years before that as well. So you'd earned the right to do something like that. Most people haven't yet earned that right. So they should really look at themselves. What's their current level of capabilities to work forwards from that and just keep judging themselves there. And the other point to make here is that you can only peak a certain number of times in a year.
Yeah.
So if you've got all these different events going on, you can't peak at everyone. You've got to choose one to focus on, maybe 2 at the most. So you might have one that's there that's like I want to enjoy that event, but you're not going to peak. You can't PB at that one and the one 3 weeks later and the one 6 weeks later.
I feel like everyone's chasing the high of these competitive challenges. And while it's great, it's amazing. I'm all here for it, but we got to rein it in. You can't have that high every 2 weeks. Your body can't sustain that type of work. It just can't do it.
But like you said, the point is not to peak every single time. Because when you actually look at it, high rocks, running is going to benefit high rocks because of the running element. High rocks is not going to benefit ultra running.
No.
I mean, some might argue that. I'm sure there'll be others that will have their views on that. But like the movements that you are doing, there's the synergy there with ultra running just doesn't really correlate. So if somebody comes to me and they're like, I really want to sign up to this ultra, I'm like, amazing. But I also think it's not just the physical element, it's the mental distraction. Mm-hmm. I think you have to be single-minded. If you're going to respect the distance that you are taking on, that's the only thing that you can think about. And that was what was key with the 76.
Yeah.
It wasn't a case of we can train harder and further and faster. It was a case of let's just focus on one thing, and that's we're going to get through each marathon day by day by day, and we're going to keep ticking them off till we hit that 76. If I started going into other hobbies whilst I'm doing that in my training, then I'm not giving it my undivided attention. I know some might argue, when you look at like the triathlon, for instance, there's a reason why those 3 activities are put together, because the synergy does work. When you look at cycling, running and swimming, they don't counter one another. Yes, obviously there'll be a lactate buildup, but it works. I think when people start signing up to multiple different events, what my advice would be is just have that awareness of like, okay, what is it that I really want to achieve from this? If it's just to connect with people, make friends and have fun, amazing. Sign up to as many as you like. But when it becomes really performance focused, I just don't want you to get to a point, and I don't want to plant a negative seed here, where you're starting to beat yourself up that you're not achieving the things that you think are possible. Because I'm telling you what, if you strip 2 of those back and you just focus on one solely, you'll get there.
Yeah. And you probably do very, very well at that one thing that you focus at,
This week's episode is sponsored by Runner. Runner is a personalized running coaching app helping runners of all abilities train for any goal. From a first 5K to a marathon, even an ultra marathon. When the time is right for you, your plan can be created within a minute and ready to go. With each plan, Runner provides all the help a runner requires, including strength and conditioning, and you can also reach out to the team at any time via the support tab inside the app. For a 2-week free trial on any personalized running plan, use the code PHOENIX. No matter your goal, Runner is there to help you achieve it.
Just prior to LA Marathon, with salmonella poisoning, that wiped out like a quarter of my training block. So psychologically, that really frustrated me. From a physical point, I felt so out of sync. I genuinely felt weak just because I hadn't been eating. I wasn't even really drinking a huge amount. There was a massive amount of sleep deprivation just because of the stomach cramps that I was getting. So I just wasn't going into a great place. And I remember calling up Chris and just saying, listen, bud, I've not run. I've literally got like just over a week until LA. What do I do? I'm considering just throwing myself out there and doing like a 20K run just to see how the body is. Because ultimately, the furthest I've run to this point was 30K. With that final quarter, the ambition would have been obviously to hit the full marathon mark. And actually through his guidance, he was like, that's the worst idea, because you have to take into account where you're at right now and how long it's going to take you to recover from that. So actually his approach was, I would much rather you reduce the distance but increase the intensity, but also add anywhere from a minute to 2 minute rest in between
periods.
Sets. Mm-hmm. And you know what? That actually, it helped me. I think ultimately we knew that a time wasn't necessarily going to be achieved, although actually I ran incredibly strong for quite a large chunk of the marathon. But from the physical point, you know, where we're at right now, it just wasn't to be.
This plays out even over longer periods. You know, people remember the athlete they used to be and they go, oh, 5 years ago, I used to run 5K, you know, every week. What do you think? Should I just run 5K again? And they just think they're just going to go straight out, you know. And the obvious thing here that we all know is if you don't use it, you lose it. But people just can't psychologically get over that previous, like, I remember my former self, I was really athletic, really strong. Sometimes even like 20 years ago, I used to do loads of sport, and they come in and they're struggling and they're weak, and they just think they could just jump back into where they used to be. And you just have to earn that right and just build up slowly. So yours is a kind of a micro version of that, but it's still the same thing. You've lost a little bit of capability in 3 weeks being ill. So just accept that, you know, take it on and just drop your volume and train what you can train without pushing your body too hard.
Do you know, I love the quote, does it make the boat row faster? Have you heard this?
Yeah.
And for me, that boat, you know, you look at it, it could be brand new, it could be aged. That boat could be 20, it could be 30 years old. So naturally the boat, it will still work, but it might not be as efficient as a brand new boat. So for me, it really is a case of anything that I do, is it going to make this boat row faster? But I also have to be mindful, I'm 34 years old. I'm not old, but I'm not necessarily young to some. So I have to be mindful of that when I make my decisions of like, if I go drinking, if I'm out drinking, or if I'm going to train, if I'm going to run, what sort of distances will I be doing? I've got to take in the weather conditions, for instance, or sleep deprivation if I've got India. Like, they make such a difference. But it has taken quite a long time for me to get to that point with that understanding. And I think it is being exposed to the likes of yourselves where I can learn that from you. And that's why I feel really passionate about setting up these platforms where we can try, support and educate as many people as well, to give them the best opportunities too.
Something really relevant actually that you're talking about, that does it make the boat go faster, is maximal gains versus marginal gains. You know, you've got this really Instagram culture where, you know, the sexy stuff looks good and gets all the attention. But you could ask that question about a lot of the content that gets posted. Does it make the boat go faster? And maybe a tiny bit. But what's going to really make the boat go faster is if you train consistently, is if you do some strength training a couple of times a week, is if you train with intent, is if your volume is gradually building up over time. You know, you've got to really earn the right to get the minimal gains, you know, the marginal gains, sorry. So you've got to really focus on maximal gains, getting good sleep in after you run, getting your diet right, you know, all healthy stuff, maybe not drinking as much as you do when you're in real key training priorities. I think some of this stuff is like basics. It just doesn't sell very well on Instagram and all the social media channels. So I think just really focusing in on the maximal gains first before you look at the other stuff.
What do you think is going to be the most appropriate plan of action? So like when it comes to the conditioning side of things, we've obviously discussed the fact that there is such a broad spectrum of events that you could take on. And so naturally you have to tailor the training to that. You know, say for instance, someone with injury, how often should they be conditioning that injury? Should that focus solely be on the injury, but are they able to work on other things? If they don't have an injury, how many times a week should be sufficient? If we just focus solely on running right now, and then certainly from like a physio recovery point of view, you know, does there have to be a really healthy balance here of like, right, well, if I'm going and I'm training with Nick, for instance, 3 times a week and I'm running 4 times a week, how many times should I be seeing you a week or a month or a year?
Well, let's just start with my little bit, and then I'll let Nick take over from that question. And if you're doing that much volume of training already, I wouldn't take any of your time, to be honest. I'd essentially tag it onto Nick's work. You know, I'd work with someone like Nick and say, I've got 2 or 3 exercises that I want you to include to help with the injury recovery, but you're already doing some great stuff. But it might even be the other way around on a more acute injury. It might be that you're actually working with me most of the time and I'm out in the gym doing the rehab stuff with you. And then I might be saying, Nick, can you just give us some conditioning drills that help him to stay fit whilst he can't run? You know, that might be the way around it starts. And then gradually it transitions to something that's more led by Nick in the later stages where I say, look, there's a couple of things I want him to keep doing, but actually now it's a bit more about the S&C training rather than the physio-led rehab.
Yeah.
Yeah, there needs to be a partnership and an understanding between the rehab side of things and the performance side of things. And I think there's a lesson to be learned for everybody who's listening, that even for myself as an S&C coach, when I'm programming for any of my clients, if any of them get an injury, I'm in communication with their physio directly, or the osteopath, whatever it is that they're seeking, to help me build out and change the training for that person. So if I'm doing it as a professional, people who don't have an S&C coach and are just doing their own strength training, they really need to make sure that the physio or the osteo, whoever is looking after the rehab, oversees their strength work and just maybe tells them where they need to rein it in, or like maybe they need to switch some exercises out for other things. But yeah, there needs to be a good balance between those two all the time, especially when they're injured. Yeah.
I mean, that's something that a lot of people potentially wouldn't even have thought of. So do you think that's almost a must where, you know, if you are fortunate enough to have physio and you also a conditioning coach, that's actually a necessity where, you know, even if those individuals have never met, it's actually a priority to ensure that the two of them are in sync with one another.
It's pretty standard practice, to be fair.
I think they're doing you a disservice if they don't.
But you say that, but I think that's the problem though, guys, isn't it? Is that actually, unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who are qualified and actually they are giving misinformation or are preaching practices that probably are detrimental.
Maybe they're a bit self-conscious about their work being criticized or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, if you're a trainer listening to this or S&C coach, whatever you are, you should be reaching out to the physio to help you shape your program and to change it when it needs to be changed. I do it all the time with physios, and that's how I get the best results with my clients. Like that's how I get them back from being injured to hitting their goals and performing well. That's how it works.
It's actually one of the things physios are often guilty of, and certainly me at times as well, is that you take people a little too far before you refer out to someone who knows what they're doing at the later stage of their recovery. Like I'm quite passionate about getting people in the gym, and my strength and conditioning knowledge is pretty good as a physio. But a lot of physios will take them so far down the line that they've potentially wasted time when they could have easily referred that out to a coach or a trainer who can upgrade on what they're doing, because we're great at regressing exercise at basic levels and giving stuff that's appropriate for injuries. We're not so good at performance type programs. So at that point, we've got to get pretty good at either working with someone who can do that or upskilling themselves. And hopefully that's something that happens as well. Physios get a bit better at delivering out exercise.
What would you say are the most common niggles and injuries that you have to work with? I mean, I put out a poll to a number of people on socials just asking questions. And I mean, a lot of it would be like the Achilles heel. I think, what's the other one?
Shin splints.
Yeah, shin splints. I think this is something that we definitely need to cover, because I think this is a topic that I think is such a grey area. I don't think a lot of people really understand what shin splints are and what can be done when you have them. Some would argue that you can train and run through them. Others would tell you not to at all. And then even when it comes to recovery options, what are your best options in order to speed the process up, even if you can?
It's in a way, like shin splints isn't really a diagnosis. Like it's what a lot of people use when they have pain on the front of their shin. That doesn't really mean anything diagnostically. It's a bit like saying, like, if your knee hurts, you've got knee splints. You know, you're not really being specific about the problem. So some people might deem shin splints when they've got a muscle overload, like a tension or a tightness in the muscles that run down. Some people might call it when the inside part of their shin bone is essentially a bone stress injury. You know, that's probably the medical understanding of true shin splints. And that stuff has to be treated like a stress fracture, which is offload, condition around it, try and look at reasons why it might be that inside part of the shin is being overloaded. In fact, sometimes that's where orthoses can work, you know, putting stuff in your shoes. But you really need a medical professional to look at that to really understand how you can improve it. Calf strength might be a problem, lots of other little things. But it's about knowing where your problem is rather than saying, well, I've got pain on the front of my shin, it's shin splints. Because if it is that bone stress problem, it's going to be really sensitive when you touch the inside part of the shin about 2/3 of the way down. So if you're touching around there and it's really hurting, you should probably go and see someone and get that looked at. If it's more in the upper part, in the muscly bit, the soft bit, you might actually get away with just stretching that and using maybe a foam roller or whatever, or just giving it a bit of extra rest, because that's the kind of thing that is safe to run through. So it does depend.
What other common injuries do you see?
I mean, you've touched on one. The Achilles tendon is very commonly injured. I'd say the tendons in the lower limb for runners, if we're talking about runners here, then it's the tendons in the lower limb that are most commonly affected. Like the patella tendon is quite often one as well, or runner's knee as it's sometimes called, Achilles tendons. And the reason for that is because running is a repetitive bounce movement, and your tendons are your springs. So it's the springs that are doing that. So if you haven't got the capacity either within the tendon or even within the muscle above the tendon, it's quite easy to overload that structure. But I prefer thinking about it rather than an overload problem, thinking about it as an underprepared problem. So you don't necessarily need to offload all the time. You might need to for a short period. What you really need to do is build capacity in the structures. You think of it as a failed structure because it couldn't handle the load. Therefore, offloading doesn't solve that problem. All it does is make it feel better in the short term. Go back to running, same happens again. So most of the time, what you really need to do is build capacity in some form of structure near that area. Let's say the calf, for example, might need the calf to be a bit stronger to handle those loads. Maybe you're running a bit too far too soon. There's little load management tricks you can do that might mean you don't have to fully stop, but it probably is about building things up rather than settling things down. Another few common ones, ITB is very common, so that's pain on the outside of the knee. That's quite a typical one. That's a little harder actually to rehab because a lot of the time you do need to back off with that. You do need to take some time away and run a bit less. But most of the time with these injuries, it's not about not running most of the time. You can find like a baseline where you can keep things ticking over until your body's ready to be able to run further.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think that's the problem, isn't it? Again, with misinformation, is that you may speak to someone and be informed of what you can do, and again, you can just sustain further injury, right?
So yeah, to go off what Charlie was saying as well, I think like what Charlie said, for most of these injuries, it's not stop running. That's not the advice. It's not just stop completely. It's back off to where you are a little bit, and then we have to build the body up to be able to sustain the amount of running, the load that you're taking. And how do we do that? We get the body stronger and we do strength training. And then you follow me and give me a message and I'll write up a strength program. You know what I mean?
This is it. I mean, this is it. The question is though, like, do you start something by conditioning the body and then going into a program?
It's a great question because most people don't do that because it's not as interesting. It's not the obvious thing to them. But actually sometimes you get an injury and it's an opportunity to upgrade your body. So sometimes it's not the worst thing that can happen. You get an injury early on, you come and speak to someone like us and maybe we can give you some advice to help you in the future. So most of the time injuries get better, right? It's quite rare that you have an injury and you go, oh damn, I'm fucked for life. It's normally something that's in the end will be okay. And in that time, use it as an opportunity to upgrade, learn more, train better in the future. So I don't think injuries are as big a deal as most people think they are. You just have to recalibrate your expectations and maybe train a bit differently.
Would you say that's one of your biggest frustrations, like both of you, that, I mean, obviously maybe less for yourself, but people tend to come to you when they have the injury rather than coming to you to prevent it? No. And how can we change that mindset?
I'm comfortable with it. I don't think that physios will often see people when they're not in pain. In fact, it's actually a certain type of person that will seek out help even when they're in pain. Some people just deal with it. Like loads of people will just have pain and go, I'll figure this out, do some research, I'll rest a bit. And they might actually get away with it and do okay. So I know that my role is going to be working with people who are suffering enough that they can't cope on their own anymore. That's my caseload. That's the people I can work with. I'm pretty cool with that. And then I'm using it as an opportunity to upgrade them and help them towards living a healthier and better life, right? Whatever that might be, whether it's running, living and, healthy aging, whatever it might be. That's what I love doing.
I also think a part of it, and you probably can be testament to this too, some of these things, running in long distances, it's uncomfortable. Sometimes you're going to get pain. And I think it's just asking yourself, at what level of pain is this for me? Is it something super severe or is it something I can actually just get through? And if that's the case, then maybe you're right to just go and continue what you're doing and you'll recover and build from that. Your body will recover and build from it, and then you can continue with your training. But yeah, I think you learn that as you start to, you said you've been in professional sport, you've been doing this for a long time. Some people haven't, so they don't understand what pain they can tolerate and what levels are severe and what are not.
I think that's so true.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the reason behind my decision making to push further at times is because I know I have the team in place to back me. They will make that decision for me if it gets to that point. If I didn't have you guys, I would probably be far less inclined to do it. And I've vocalized this many, many times before. My pain threshold is up there.
It's high.
It's up there, but that's taken many, many years of like adaptation almost to that. I'm kind of mentally and physically prepared for it. But the greatest asset I have is my daughter. I'm always very mindful of how far will I push this? And if I push this too far, what impact will that have on her? So she's a huge asset in that sense. So again, I think it's just being mindful of that. Like, what do you have around you? I think it's a case of, it's great to have these conversations where it's like, fucking dig in and get through it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just be mindful of what implications that comes with. Because I think ultimately, if you want to be sustainable in whatever sport it is that you are doing, and you want that longevity, be mindful of that. Because ultimately, if you smash that particular race or that challenge that you set yourself, but then that fucks you for the next 2 years, where's the logic in that?
Exactly.
Well, let's go back to your calf strain, right? So say average Joe, as we mentioned earlier, say average Joe comes in and they've torn their calf running. I'm going to tell them to back the fuck off. I'm going to tell them, look, take a couple of weeks, let's rehab it slowly, because that's not their job. Their job is not to run. Their job is to feel good and look after their body and be fit to run again in the future. You had this one long 76-day event that we had to get through one way or another. Such a different conversation to have. That's why we were able to take that gamble and make a different decision for you. Most people don't need a huge team around them. They just need some sensible advice and to train fairly normally, because it's not their job. And if you do want to do something crazy and do something really specific and niche or perform at a really elite level, then you might need a team around you, because at that point the decisions are very different. It's very, very much about balancing off lots of different risks and rewards and knowing what that asymmetry there means. For you, a 5% asymmetry over 76 marathons is huge, whereas for most people it means nothing. They could probably get 10% asymmetry in their hamstring or calf strength and get away with it and be okay. We might try and close it a bit, but most of the time people will be fine with that. So it's just a very different decision whether it's a performance athlete or a recreational athlete, just having a different conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's interesting. If you look at my current status of where I'm at physically after the assessment with you, right now it looks like post LA Marathon, grade 1 tear to the left hamstring, and then just spasms to both VMOs right in the knees, which we've been there before pre-Run for 1 Million, which, it's not an ideal thing to have, but all of them are quite easily resolved.
For sure.
In terms of like moving forwards, I think you have to make the rational decision to go, maybe certain races that I was signed up to are not looking likely, but I think it's knowing that you have the rest of the year to make it right. So I think it's kind of making peace with that rather than kind of like beating yourself up that something's just not achievable. It is what it is. You can't control the uncontrollables, and this just comes with the territory. And actually, I think in a weird way, if you really are invested in what it is that you do, these are the parts as well, I think, could be quite fun, in the sense that this is where you really learn from it, educate yourself, and actually, like, if you do come up with something like this again, like we had the VMO pre, you're far better prepared to face it.
Yeah, well, if you're halfway through your 76 marathons and I see you, then I'm probably saying, let's see how you get on tomorrow, because you're halfway through the event. But you're not. Your priorities have changed and you've got a different schedule coming up. So we can make some different choices about that and maybe think more long-term about peaking at an event. Something more exciting to you this year seems like running a really fast time in a marathon. Well, to do that, you might need a longer period of time, and therefore running through a grade 1 hamstring tear and a VMO spasm bilaterally probably isn't the smartest thing to do. You want to settle that down and then build things back up again in the right way. So it's just, again, a different thing, isn't it?
I try to stress to people, you really have to understand, and I think have the appreciation for even being able to step that foot on that start line.
For sure.
Like, the challenge isn't always the challenge itself. The challenge is to even get to the challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
For so many. And, if you talk to friends, if you look at yourself, like, sustaining injuries is something that so many people have. And actually, like, it's great that I think more people are being vocal about it and actually making those decisive decisions to go, listen, it's a real shitter. I've worked really hard for this, but it's just not my time. But tomorrow could be.
So I think injuries are the price that active people pay for living longer and healthier lives in the end. So in the end, it's going to pay you off, but you might have to struggle through a few injuries on the way. People who don't get injured so much, wasting away, maybe living more sedentary lives, they're the ones that have problems in the future. So you might be going, God, I'm always injured. But if you're fit and healthy in general, that's okay. Yeah. That's what we're here for, like that's our bread and butter.
Also, if you look at professional athletes, I mean, it's very rare that you find, let's say, look at Premier League, for example. I doubt there'd be many Premier League players currently that have not sustained an injury in their professional career. It happens. That's just, it's part and parcel of what you do, So it's just have to be accepted that it is something that you may come across, you may have to face. And I think the way you put it is perfect, that you have to see it as an opportunity to learn something about your body and learn something about how to fix a problem. That's what it is problem solving, which is what we do day to day, right? And if you can do that for yourself, it's great. It's like empowering, isn't it? You know how to fix it. If it ever came up again, you would know what to do.
Yeah, 100%. Do you know what? This year, I think we're agreed is very much just kind of like a kind of a rest and recharge type year. There's a few goals in mind, but you know, I've obviously kind of shared with you guys the idea for the next world record attempt, which hasn't been announced yet to many people until we've fully got it across the line. But it's so exciting knowing that you have that team in place where it doesn't matter how far you wish to push. It's just with them by your side, it's achievable. How does it feel for you guys? Like now you're within this family and these ideas are pitched to you. And obviously we've seen the success of the past and what we intend to achieve in the future. For me, I obviously know what it's like when I tell people and you get the reaction that you hope to get. For someone like yourselves, when I'm like, listen, this is what we're pitching to you. What do you think? Is it a unique experience to what you're used to?
Oh, it's just the most fun I had last year was working on this stuff. You know, it was just so different, so unique, and like challenges you to think in different ways, and yet the payoff was so worth it, right? It just felt so good. Everyone was together on it. This unity was there. You're achieving something no one's ever achieved before, and it was just so special. It was just a really great moment. Everyone was there at the end as well. It was just really fun.
Yeah, I'm someone, I like to put myself in a situation where I have to learn and I have to figure it out for myself. And that was exactly what it was. I'd never worked with anyone that had wanted to do that ever before, but I was thinking about it all the time. How could I make it the best for you? How can I give you the best plan to get the best outcome? And yeah, it's something that excites me. It lights the fire in my belly. You know what I mean? Gets me going, gets me tingly.
I think by association as well, like you are a better version of yourself being around me. I mean, I don't know. Were you an average bloke when I met you?
I was one of those average Joes.
I don't know. The banter was good, semi-average. Performance great.
So now it's slightly above average Joe. That's
what you've
elevated into.
But honestly, guys, I just feel, I say this to you, but I feel so grateful that you're in my life, and I think that's something that I would stress to people is, again, it's not just about the data, and I think the performance background of the individual, like the synergy from a personality point has got to be there. The whole point of a coach is for them to be firm with you, to be assertive, to be equally as ambitious with goals, but also to have fun. And the reality is you cannot uphold, I speak from my own personal experience, a high level of performance in every single thing that you do. You have to find that balance. You know, it's important that when I go into, a conditioning session with you, that we achieve the goals that we're setting, but equally, let's do it with a smile on our face and have a laugh.
Yeah.
When I come to you in terms of recovery as well, it's really nice for me to be able to decompress from the high intensity that I'm at the entire time.
I think you need a bit of luck sometimes as well. It was totally random that we did work. we didn't necessarily have to work, right?
It could have not. You're right, actually. We could have butt heads and it could have gone tits up, but yeah.
Guys, what an absolute cracker of an episode, if I may say so myself. And I can't speak on my performance because I'm the host. I'm talking about you two. I mean, I was all right. You two were phenomenal. Both in the gym, in the physio room, and it turns out on a podcast as well.
Yeah.
I love you both. Thank you so much. And, for anyone that's listening, like I said, that next world record is pending. These guys are going to be in my corner and another phenomenal story is about to be written.
I'm excited.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, man.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, you fatted biscuit, all I ask of you in return is that you push that subscribe button and leave a review. Unless it's a bad one, you can keep that, you sausage. Your support, though, makes such a difference to this podcast and enables it to grow and connect with even more people around the world.